Hi everybody, if you're like me, you have a used wooden cutting board at home that's showing signs of wear. Looking at my cutting board, the surface has scratches and scars from the past 3 years of use. It even has a few stains from the food that we cut on it. As you can see, the board is also in need of a fresh coat of cutting board oil as it's looking dry. But before I do that, I'm going to show you the necessary steps to remove the scratches and scars to bring this board back to life. So here we are at my workbench. Before I start the sanding process, I'm going to remove the cutting board feet off the bottom of this board, and then I'm going to install these bench cookies into my bench for better grip when sanding. To start the sanding process, I'm going to be using a 5-inch orbital sander, which can be commonly found at any big box store. The first grit I'll be using is 80, which is considered medium, but should be good enough still to remove the scratches and scars from the surface of the board. Once the scratches have been removed using the 80 grit, I'll move up to 120 grit, which is considered a fine grit. This will help in the process with getting a smoother finish. Once I've sufficiently sanded with 120 grit, I'll move up to 180, which is even a finer grit. It's important not to skip too many grits because in the end, you'll have a smoother finish. One of the most important things during this restoration is to make sure to protect yourself. Always wear protective gear. I want to stop for a second to show you that if your sandpaper doesn't seem to be working, that's because the residual oil that is left in the board is not gumming up your sandpaper. It might be necessary to change out the sandpaper quite often. One of the most important steps of the restoration of this board is before the final stage of sanding is to spritz the surface of the board with water. This will allow the grain to raise, and then once it's dry, you can do the final coat of sanding, which will give it an even smoother finish. Now that the board's finished drying, the last part of the sanding process is to use 220 grit. 220 grit is a super fine grit which will give this board a nice finish when it's done. Now that I've finished with 220 grit, it's time to blow the dust off this board and then give a fresh coat of cutting board oil. Now that the dust has been successfully removed, it's time to apply the cutting board oil. And for that, I'm going to use a plastic lid below my cutting board because we're applying oil and it can get kind of messy. The brand of oil that I like to use is walrus oil because it has extra ingredients added to it for extra protection. You can go to a big box store and pick up another brand. Just make sure that it's mineral oil and not vegetable oil. Vegetable oil can go rancid, which can ruin your board. Now that the board has been covered in oil, make sure to leave it soaking for at least 24 hours. The wood grain will soak in the oil over time, which will increase the life of the board. Now that my board has soaked for 24 hours, it's time to wipe away the oil that did not get absorbed into the wood. And for that, I'm going to be using clean shop towels. Alright, now that I have absorbed all the oil off of the board, it's time to put the rubber feet back on. These cutting board feet are actually different from the original. I decided to put new ones on because they have a better grip. Alright, now that the feet are back on the board, it's time to put this board back into good use. Alright, so here we are in my kitchen. Let's see how this board performs. Tastes pretty good.